In this part, we're going to work on creating the transaction. Now that we have designed the transaction model, we're going to create a new service for the transaction. So let's create a file, transaction service. And inside this, we're going to create a function. Now we're going to use the same function work for creating and updating the transaction. And this is going to be an async function which will receive the transaction data. And it's going to be of type transaction type. And for the transaction type, we have the following properties, which I hope you guys already know at this point. So now inside this function, we're going to create a try catch block, which we can get from another function. So for the delete wallet, let's just copy this block of code. We just need a try catch block. So let's just remove all of this. And let's change this to error creating or updating the transaction. Now we're going to return a response, but let's just remove this message. Okay, so now we're going to get the data from this transaction data object. We're going to get the ID, the type, wallet ID, and the image. We're getting the ID because later we're going to implement the transaction update as well. So let's just add some validation if we don't have the amount. And we need to get the amount as well. Okay, so if we don't have any amount or the amount is less than equal to 0, we don't have the wallet ID or we don't have the type, then we're gonna return a response saying the data is invalid. So let's just add invalid transaction data like this. But if we do have the data, then we're gonna perform updation or creation. Now here I'm gonna create a condition. If we have the ID, that means we are updating this transaction, and that is a bit complicated and we're gonna handle this later. But for now, I'll just add a to-do comment here. And if we don't have any ID, that means we're creating a new transaction. And for that, first we're gonna update the wallet for this new transaction. So I'm gonna create a function that will update the wallet for this transaction. So let's create a new function and we'll call it update wallet for new transaction. Okay, so this will receive some properties as the wallet ID, the amount that we are updating, and the type as income or expense. So in here, we're going to use the try catch block. So let's just copy this block of code and use it here. Okay, so let's change this error to error updating the wallet for new transaction. Let's save this. So first we're gonna get the wallet reference, which we're gonna update. So let's create a wallet ref and use the document. Here, let's give it the object firestore, the collection name as wallets, and the wallet ID. Then we're gonna get the wallet snapshot from this reference. So let's use the function getDoc. Okay, so on this snapshot, we can use a function exists, and that will check if there is a document against this ID. And if it doesn't exist, then we're gonna return an error. So let's just console log. Actually, let's just copy the same error here. And let's remove this. This will say wallet not found. And let's remove this error as well. Let's save this. Okay, so if the wallet exists, then we're gonna get the data from this snapshot. And we're gonna get it as the wallet type. And the wallet has these types. Okay, so now that we have the amount and the wallet data, if we are making an expense transaction, we can actually make a condition to see if the selected wallet have enough balance. So if the type is expense, that means we are spending from this wallet, and the wallet data dot amount minus the amount that we are spending is less than 0. That means we don't have enough balance. Now this will have the value. Okay, so in that case we're gonna return a response. So let's just copy this response and let's add a message adds the selected wallet don't have enough balance. But if we do have enough balance, then we're gonna prepare the properties that we're gonna update. So first we're gonna create the update type, and that's gonna be total income or total expense. So if you see the wallet, each wallet has this property as total expenses and total income, which is gonna be the total expenses from this wallet and total incomes added to this wallet. So we're gonna check what field we're gonna update, and this will be based on the type. If the type equals to income, then we're gonna update the total income. So this will be the property as total income, but if it is not income, then it will be total expenses. So this will be the type that we're gonna update. Then we're gonna have the updated wallet amount, and it will also be based on the type. If the type is income, then we can update the wallet amount as the wallet amount plus the amount of the transaction, like this. But if it's not income, then we're gonna minus the amount of transaction from the wallet amount. So wallet data dot amount minus the amount of the transaction. Let's save this. And this is for the wallet balance, but now we're gonna update the totals in the wallet, and that's the total income or total expense, which is also based on the type of the transaction. So both will increase if it's even income or expense. So let's just change this to plus, and if the type is income, then we're gonna update the total income, and if it's expense, then we're gonna update total expenses, like this. Okay, so now we're ready to update the wallet. So let's use the update doc method, and let's provide the wallet reference. This is the reference that we are using, and we're gonna update the amount of the wallet, and that's gonna be the updated wallet amount. And then we're gonna update the totals. So we're gonna use the property update type. Okay, so we need to change this to update type, and that's gonna be the updated totals, which can either be total income or total expense, and this is based on the type of the transaction. If it's income, then we will be updating the total income, but if it's expense, then we'll be updating the total expense, and we've already calculated the updated total amount. And lastly, it will return a success as true if the wallet is updated. Now let's use this function here, and this will give us a response. And we need to pass the wallet ID, then the amount of the transaction and the type of the transaction. Let's add this symbol so that TS knows that these won't be undefined. And if we don't have the success as true on this response, that means we got an error, and we will just return this result. Okay, so now the wallet is hopefully updated at this point, and now we're gonna upload the image. And for that, let's just copy this block of code and paste it here. Okay, so we don't need this part of the condition, so let's just use image. If we have the image, then we're gonna upload it using upload file to Cloudinary. Here we need to pass the image into transactions folder. And if the file is not uploaded, here we will return a message saying failed to upload the receipt. Then it will be updated in the transaction data.image property. Okay, so the image upload part is done. Now we're gonna create a transaction reference, and this will be conditional as well, because we can either be updating or creating a new transaction. So based on this ID, if we have the ID, then we're gonna create a reference for this specific document. So here let's use Firestore, the transactions collection and the ID of the document. But if we don't have the ID, then we're gonna create a new reference. So let's use dog, and then the collection method. Here we'll pause the file store and the transactions like this. Now that we have the transaction reference, we can use a function setDog, and it will create or update the reference if it already exists. So here we need to pass the transaction reference, then the transaction data, and we need to pass an option as merge true. So this will merge the fields that we are updating if we are updating the document, and lastly it will just return the data. So let's just separate all the transaction data and the ID, and ID can be found on transaction reference dot ID if we're creating the new transaction. So now let's review what we have done so far. So this function will receive this data, and let's then do some validation. If we have the ID, then we will do the update, but later. But if we don't have the ID, then we will call this function to update the wallet for this new transaction. Inside this function, we will create a reference. We will get the data if it exists on this wallet snapshot. If we get the data, then we're gonna make a condition if the selected wallet have enough balance. If it doesn't, we will just return from here. But this is just for the expense transactions. Then using the type, we're gonna get if we are updating total income or total expenses, because only the type of the transaction determines if you're adding something to the wallet or spending amount from the wallet. And based on this type, we have updated all these properties. Then finally, we're gonna use update dog to update the amount in the wallet. So this is for this function. Then after this function, we're gonna check if we have the image. Then we're gonna upload the image into the transactions folder using Cloudinary, and we'll set it to transaction data.image. Then we are creating a reference of the transaction, which is also based on the ID, because later we're gonna handle the update transaction as well. So this is dynamic. Then we're using a method setDog that will either create or update the transaction with merge as true. And finally, we're gonna return the transaction data. Now let's go to the transaction model and see if this is working. Okay, so we need to go into the on submit function, and here I'm gonna add a comment that include the transaction ID, which we're gonna handle later when we are updating the transaction, but I just added this so that I don't forget this later. Now first I'm gonna start the loading, so set loading to true, and then we're gonna get the response from this API, create or update the transaction, and let's pause the transaction data, and we're passing this data. Now after this, we're gonna stop the loading, so set loading to false. And now we'll check if result.success is true. That means the transaction is created. So we'll just go back to the previous screen. But if it's not, then we're gonna alert the user, and this will just show the message from the API. So result.message. Okay. Why do we get this error? Oh, okay. So we need to define the type of the data that this function will return. So let's use the response type. So each function will return this response type, and this will contain a success, the data, and the message property. So everything looks good. So let's just save this, and let's see if this is working. Well, let me just reload the application. So right now we don't have any balance in either of the wallets. So first I'm gonna test the validations using an expense transaction. Let's choose freelancing wallet. Then we have the date and the amount. Oh, we need to choose the expense category as well. So let's use entertainment. Let's put the amount as $10 and description as watched a movie. Okay, so we can skip the receipt and hit submit. So there we can see an error, selected wallet don't have enough balance, which is true. And this is coming from the update wallet function that we created here. So inside this, we are checking if there is an expense transaction and the amount is greater than the wallet amount, then it will trigger this error. So first we will have to put some money into the wallet. So let's use side hustle and deposit $50. And let's just say side gig payout. Okay. So let's submit and we go back. That means the transaction is created. So to confirm this, we need to go into the Firebase. Let's just refresh. There we can see the new transactions collection. And we have one document that says amount of 50, category as entertainment, because previously we chose entertainment for the expense. So that was being saved. But anyway, description, the type, UID, and the wallet ID. So all the data is coming through, and if we go to the wallet, that must be updating as well. So we deposited $50 into this wallet, and there we can see the amount is 50, the total income is 50. So everything is working as expected, and the wallets tab is updated. The side hustle shows $50 and the total balance is 50. So that is working as well. Now let's put money into all the wallets. So let's make more income transactions, this time into salary. Let's put $100. I got paid. Okay, so submit. Okay, so now if we go to the wallets, now here we can see the total balance is 150 and the salary has $100 amount. Let's put money into the freelancing wallet as well, $50 and logo design fee. Okay, now let's submit. Now let's go to the wallets and the total balance is updated to 200 and all the wallets have balance now. And we can see all of these updates in the Firebase. So for each wallet, you can see the amount is updated and the total income is updated. So now that we have enough balance, we can make expense transactions. So let's make an expense transaction from the salary. And let's choose the category as dining and put $8 and add the description as 8 sushi. Okay, then hit submit. Okay, so the transaction is created and the updated total balance is 192 because we made a transaction of $8. And we can see this update in the wallets in the Firestore. So the total income is still 100 and the total expense is now $8 and the total balance is $92. So this is correct. And this won't have any effect on the other wallets. So you can see all the other wallets remains the same, and now we can see all the transactions in here. So let's go to the transaction that we just made. So here is the expense transaction. You can see the type is expense and I misspelled the description. It should be 8 sushi, but anyway, the main thing is it's working correctly and all the calculations are correct. So now I'm going to work on this section to fetch the data and display it here. But before that, let me just remove some console logs in this function. And before I start working on the home screen, let me just quickly add some transactions so that we have some data. Okay, so after adding some more transactions, the balance is now 172 and these are the updated wallets. So now we can work on fetching the recent transactions and to calculate the total balance, income and expense. Now to calculate this, we're gonna go to the home card component. And here first we're gonna fetch the wallet. So let's go to the wallet screen and just copy this hook and paste it here. So this also uses the current user. So we're gonna have to import the current user from use auth hook like this. Then this will be the wallet's error and let's call it wallet loading. Okay, now we need to fetch the use fetch data hook, the wallet type, where function, and the order by function. Now that we have all the wallets, we can calculate the total balance, total income, and the total expense. So let's create a function get totals. And inside this function, we're going to use a method reduce on the wallets array. And this will give us the total value and the item in each iteration. And we're going to have to pass some default values. So for the total, it's going to be an object. So here we will have the balance, the income, and the expense values. And we're going to calculate these totals inside this callback function. So here let's just calculate the balance, and it's gonna be the amount on each wallet. So we're just gonna plus the totals dot balance plus item dot amount. So that will be the combined balance on all the wallets. Then let's just copy this for income and balance, and similar to the balance, we're just gonna plus the total income on all the wallets and item dot total income. And same for the expenses. So this will be expenses, and this will calculate item dot total expenses. Okay, so here we have an error. We need to define these types. So totals will be any, and the item is obviously a wallet item. So let's give it wallet type. Okay, so now that we have all the total values, we just return the totals object, and here we can call this function to get the total balance. So let's just remove this, and here we need to call the function get totals. Then we need to use the property balance, and we're gonna use to fixed function to show only 2 decimal points after the total balance. Okay, so we need to return this function as well. That will give us the object, so that will fix the error. So let's save this, and there we can see the total balance. Now let me add a space between the dollar sign. Okay, so this is the total balance, and we can confirm this if we go to the wallet screen. This is the total balance, and now we need to work on the income and the expense. So let's call this function here get totals. Actually, we can just copy this same function here, and we'll just change the type to income. Let's save this. So here we have the total income, and this is all the incomes that we added to all the wallets. So that is what we're showing here. Then let's just paste it for the expense. Let's change this to expenses, and that's gonna be the total expenses from all the wallets that we have here. The total income and the total expenses are basically the sum of all the transactions that we add to these wallets. So that is what we're showing here, but we do need to use the loading here. So if I reload the app, you can see when we are fetching the wallets data, it shows 0 values there. I want to show some dashes when the data is being fetched. So here we can use the wallet loading to show that. So here I'm just gonna add a condition if wallet loading is true. Then I'm just gonna render some dashes here. Otherwise, we will call this function. So when we get the total, when we get the wallets, then it will calculate the balance and show it here. So let me just copy this for all the statistics. It's not the best way to show the loading, but I'm just giving you an idea that you can use this loading to show the loading skeleton or anything that you want. So now it's working perfectly fine. Now we're gonna go to the home tab, and now we're gonna work on fetching the recent transactions and replace this dummy data. So first we're gonna add some constraints that we're gonna apply when fetching these transactions. So let's add an array, and first I'm gonna use a where condition to get all the transaction where UID matches the current user dot UID like this. Then I'm gonna order them by the date in descending order. Then I just want to show the last 30 transactions, so we can use the limit function to get only the 30 items from this collection. So now I'm gonna use the same hook that we used for fetching the wallet. So let me just copy this code and paste it here. And let's change the wallets to recent transactions. Then loading to transactions loading. And let's import this hook. Change the type to transaction type and the collection to transactions. Now let's just remove these constraints and we're gonna use the constraints array that we have here. And now we can pass the recent transactions to the transaction list. And let's save it. No transactions added yet. Also, when you first try to call this query, because this doesn't have any index in the Firebase, this will create an error and ask you to create an index. So let's just open this link and this will ask to create or update the indexes using these properties. Let's just create it so that we can fetch the data efficiently. And once this is enabled, we can just reload the app. And this time, hopefully it will fetch the data. There we go. It's showing the transactions. That means it's fetching the data, but it's still showing the dummy values because we hard coded these values. So if I go to the recent transactions and here, let me just console log the item inside this function and see if you're actually getting the real data. So let me just console log the description of the item. Let's save this. So there we can see in the console, these are the descriptions of all the transactions that we added previously. So this is in fact working. Now, let me just remove this console log. And first, before we work on the transaction item, I'm gonna add the loading state for this transaction list. Right now, this is false, but we're gonna use the transactions loading. Now, if I just reload the application, there we can see the loading state, and when we fetch the data, it will just render the transactions. Now, let's work on the transaction item and use the real data. So let's just remove this category. And here we're gonna have to get the category based on the type of the transaction. So if it's income, then we're gonna use the income category. But if it's an expense, then we're gonna use the expense categories and pass the item dot category. Why do we see this error? Okay, so this won't be undefined if the type is expense. So if we pass the item dot category, this will pick an object from the categories. And if it's not, then it will show the income category. So let's just save this. There we go. Now it's showing the category for each transaction and it's dynamic. And we can see the first transactions that we made for income. Now let's change this to item dot description. There we can see the description of each transaction. Then we're gonna work on the date and the amount. So with the amount, we're gonna show a plus symbol if the transaction is of type income, but if it's not, then we're gonna use a minus symbol. So let's add a condition. If the type equals to income, then we will just append plus and then the dollar sign. And if it's not, then we will just append minus and the dollar sign. Then after this, we will just add the amount in the transaction. So item dot amount. Let's save this. So there we can see the amounts are updated, but they're in red as they were expenses, but they're not. So we're gonna have to make the color dynamic. If the type of the transaction is income, then we're gonna use the primary color. But if it's not, then we're gonna use the rose color like this, and let's save this. So the income transactions will look like this and the expenses will look like this, and these are looking pretty good. Now we're gonna have to format the date for the transactions. So let's create a new variable here, item dot date, and let's change this to a date. We need to take it as the timestamp, the Firebase timestamp, and change this to date, and then we need to convert it to local date string, and we're gonna have to use these values to format it correctly, and this will just show the date as the numeric day and the short month as January as JAN and December as DEC. So let's just use the date here. Now let's save this and the dates are updated. So this section is complete, the loading is working and the UI is looking pretty good. So let me just reload the app. Okay, so now I'm gonna try to add a transaction to see if the real-time updates are working. Let me add an income in the freelancing wallet. Let's add an amount of 20 and description as task payout. Let's submit. Okay, there we can see the amount is added to the wallet and we can see the recent transaction. Now let me add an expense and let's see if the validations are still working. So if I make a transaction of $100 and we don't have enough balance in the wallet, let's submit. There we can see the selected wallet don't have enough balance, but if I change the wallet to salary and lower the amount and then submit, there we can see the new transaction and the total balance is updated. If we go to the wallets, the salary wallet is updated. So it's all working. Now I'm gonna add more transactions in the random dates just so we have some data to work with. Okay, so after adding some transactions, now the total balance is 242. And in the next part, we'll work on updating the transactions.